welcome to Carly's Colorful Corner where you will learn how to paint a sea otter using watercolor. For today's lesson, you will need a medium-sized brush for filling in the parts inside your sea otter's body. You'll also need a small brush for the outlining part of your sea otter's body and a few oil pastels for your seaweed and a large brush for your water. Before we begin anything, I highly encourage you to take some oil pastel, preferably maybe a light green and a dark green, and start scratching in your seaweed. Also decide on a light source. Wherever your light source is, whatever's closest to it is going to get the lighter color, and whatever's furthest away from it is going to get the darker color. This will add a sense of realism to your piece. It will give you an idea of lighting, and it will also make your colors pop. I also encourage you to vary the size and the length and the height of your seaweed. This will also create a sense of realism because no seaweed or kelp has the same size. They're growing at different rates, they're flowing at different rates because of the water current. So let's just add a few variety pieces to your work before moving forward. The next step is totally preferential, which means you can choose to do this if you want to, or you can choose to just use watercolor if you want to. I personally want my sand to pop, so I am going to use a clean yellow pastel, oil pastel. I'm going to run that oil pastel along the outline of my hill's body, and then maybe use some brown to add some specks or rocks into the seabed for my sea otter piece. Totally up to you. You can decide to add a starfish if you want, maybe some seashells. Totally up to you. No pressure. Your art, your choice. If you want, you could add a few bubbles using some organic blotchy kind of blobs for your shapes. Totally up to you. You could decide to add some other details like maybe a school of fish in the background. This is your art, your choice. You personalize and customize it to your likes and desires. And once you're done, uh, press play, and then we'll continue on to the next step. The next step is fairly simple, but it is going to take a lot of careful uh, work. So we're going to take that small brush that we mentioned earlier. However, we want that brush to be damp. We don't want it to be too wet. We don't want it to be too dry. We want it damp. So you don't want water dripping off of it, but you want it to be kind of like, let's say you take a shower and your hair is towel dried, but it's still slightly wet. You're going to want it to be that type of texture when it comes to the amount of water you're thinking of. Now, once you get your brush out, you're going to lather it up with paint. You decide what color you want your otter to be. It could be brown, purple, orange, totally your choice, your art, your choice, but you want to have a lot of paint on your brush. When you have a lot of paint on your brush, start outlining the edges of your body, your otter's body. Keep doing this until your paint runs dry. Keep in mind as you're working on this process, we're only doing the outside lines of the otter's body. So the area in which the stomach or the cheeks or the inner pads, those we are not outlining those whatsoever. This is specifically because we want those areas to have like a seamless blend between light and dark. If you put an outline there, it's going to flatten your image. It's going to make it harder for your image to look more realistic. You only want the outside of the otter to be outlined for now. When your paint runs dry, you're going to take your medium-sized flat brush that I mentioned earlier in class, and you're going to get that brush damp and use that damp brush to start dragging that thick line of color in towards the inside of your otter's body. This is a controlled way to fill in the body of your otter without going too dark too fast. I want you to only work on the section that you have just put down. Do not start outlining until you finish that area and fill in all the white with your previous outline. Specifically because if you move too quickly from one outline to the next, your paint is going to dry. And if you allow too much time between each outline step, your paint will be harder to spread from one side of the paper to the other. So just work at one section at a time from top to bottom. That way when you're finished with your otter's tail, you'll know for sure by the time you're finished, you should have a dry otter at the top of the otter's head. And this will give you an area to work with when you start working on the C part of your piece. As previously stated, my light source is going to be on the top right side, right corner of my paper. So the shadows are going to appear on the left side of my otter's body. Now we are going to build on this filler shade that we have just put in here. And we are going to add a layer of paint on top of the first layer that we put down. We're doing this so we can get our value or our shade a little bit darker than our first layer that has been put down on the paper. Because we want that side of the otter to look a little bit darker, we need just a little bit more paint. Take your time with this. Your piece should be still moist or a little wet, so it should be easy to control the spreadability of your paint, but it shouldn't be way too wet where your paint flies all over the place. So because you've been taking so much time filling in the rest of the otter's body, your paper has dried a little bit. So this is going to allow you more control to add in those tiny shapes of darkness that we're going to do next. Add these little layers of darkness on the undersides of your otter's arm. If you are copying me when it comes to the light source, if your light source is in the top right hand corner, then the left side, the furthest left side of your otter's body is going to be darker. The further away from the light source, it's going to be darker. So if you need to add another layer of paint along your outline on the left side of your otter, please do so and then use that extra layer or that outline that you just put down to kind of drag some of that dark color in towards the face. You want the shadow to get lighter and lighter and lighter as it moves from left to right. And the way you do this is making sure that more of your paint is on the shadow side, and as you move further towards and into the light source, your paint starts to slowly thin out. So if you need to scoop some of that extra paint and spread it elsewhere, please feel free to do so. Your paper should not be super wet at this point, so it should allow you the ability to kind of move these shadows or these layers of paint without too much trouble. Due to timing and storage allowance on my computer, I am going to need to shorten this video. Instead of removing imagery from the video itself, I'm going to fast forward from start to finish for the otter's body. That way you can see how I'm building the color from dark to light on the underside of the otter's tail and on the left side of the otter's body. You will start to notice that I am having darker colors in these areas, and as it moves or as the area gets closer to the light source, it's going to get lighter and lighter and lighter. Feel free to pause this video, finish up the areas in which I worked on during this part, and then press play when you're ready to continue on to the next step. Now for the stomach and the chin area of the otter itself, I am actually using the same color with a little bit of mixture of yellow in it. However, my paint has been diluted with a little bit more water to make a lighter shade. That way my stomach and my chin don't compete with the brown fur of the outer side of the otter's body. We are going to repeat what we did in step one, where we outline and drag in with the darker brown. We're going to repeat that process with the feet as well. I am not entirely sure what you have chosen for your sea otter to hold, whether it be a crab, a heart, a seashell. So I am going to let you decide what you want that color to be. But now it's time to do the nose and the eyes and the mouth. Here we're going to use the same consistency of paint that we used for our outline. It's going to have like more paint to water ratio. This will prevent you from getting a smeared color, and it will also give you more control with fine-tuned line. If you decided to add bubbles, let's use some oil pastel to kind of make it so those bubbles pop and they start peeking through your watercolor before you start adding your wash. But the rest of class, all we're going to be doing is using a blue wash for your sea water and a yellow wash for your sand. And don't forget to finish your ears before moving forward. Now, a wash is a very simple technique. You basically have more water to watercolor ratio. You're going to add a thin layer of water along your paper first. Then you're going to add some color to it. That thin layer of water is going to make it easy to spread that color from one side of the paper to the other side of the paper. Now you can vary the amount of paint as you're painting your background. You can have some splotches of darkness, you can have some splotches of light. Just in order to get this, you're literally building or adding different layers of watercolor paint to get that dark area. If you're looking for a sea foam kind of, effect with speckles, or maybe you want some speckles of brown on your sand, you could always splatter that paint after you're done, but only do so when you are 100% done with your work. So, splatter is taking a wet brush, filling it with a heavy amount of paint, and flicking or spraying that paint across your paper. If you decide to do this and you want your sand to be a different color, cover your sand with a piece of paper, spray down your blue, and then take that page and cover the blue area once it's dry, and then spray down your brown on your sand part. That, my friend, is how you can paint a sea otter using watercolor. Stay tuned for some more tricks and tips. And until then, I look forward to seeing you in the classroom.